So as David said, Nathan Hodges, General Manager at TrinityP3, and I'm here today to answer perhaps one of the most frequently asked questions we get is how many agencies do you need and what do we do about that? So as I say, this is perhaps the question that we get asked more than any other over the last 18 months. And I was just listing out, in fact, before the webinar began, the actual number of clients that we've been working with over the last year alone that have come to us with this problem. And the problem is usually phrased as, I think we've got too many agencies. Sometimes there's a solution attached to that problem, but the problem is normally expressed like that. And I've counted over 11 in the last year alone. And as I say, often it's just a problem. Sometimes a solution is suggested there as well. Like, we've got too many agencies, we need to pitch, which is not necessarily the solution at all. Or we've got too many agencies and we're not sure what they all do, which is very common. Or we're sure we've got too many agencies, but we're not quite sure about that. And there's another one there. So today, what I'm wanting to do is I'm wanting just to get those listening to the webinar to understand perhaps the dimensions of that question and what that really means in terms of what we should be doing as marketers to remedy this, and also how we should be behaving as agency people as well, in order not to make it worse, certainly to try and make it better, and perhaps even to be the ones that kind of forge deeper partnerships out of the changes that might need to happen in an overextended roster. So how are we going to do that? I'm going to give you three kind of ways to look at this. I'm first of all just going to talk about the ever-expanding roster and why it is so common and why so many marketers are finding themselves in this position these days. I'm then going to explode off that as to what that expansion actually means in terms of marketers' day jobs and also for agencies as well, and how we're all sometimes our own worst enemies as well as our best friends in trying to get this sorted. And then finally, what we should be doing about it as marketers, as agencies, as marketing people, in order best to drive the businesses in which we work. So why is it that we've got this very common problem? Why is it that marketers these days have all got agency rosters that can number, indeed, they can number up to 92? We had an agency, a roster on a spend of around $75 million that numbered 92 bona fide agencies for one of our clients around 12 months ago. We've come across another marketer that had a roster of around 70 agencies, but instead of a spend of 72 million, they had about 6 to 8 million, depending on what the year was. So there's no hard or fast here, and the question is how the hell have people got here? How the hell have we all arrived here as an industry? Well, some of these things are those things that everybody in the industry, in every trade rag, in every seminar, webinar, platform keeps talking about. It's the old hoary things. You'll notice I haven't written the phrase big data there, because it's past its use by date and its usefulness as a phrase. But you'll see the familiar themes. So obviously we have an unprecedented proliferation of channels available to us now, which is wonderful news, and allows us to be a lot more precise and exact in our targeting, and gives us far more fun as marketers, far more tools to play with. So it's tremendous in many ways and very, very interesting. But it does mean that we drive the expansion of our agency rosters, because there are more and more specialists required to master more and more specialised channels in more and more targeted conversations. Also, I mean, the other hoary old theme here, of course, that we're all painfully aware of, or delightfully aware of, depending on what hat you want to wear, is that technology these days doesn't just transform other people's businesses, it transforms every single aspect of ours, including internal aspects of all of our businesses. And so where marketing and communications could be in a box over in the corner or in a separate division, of course now, because of the way that technology works across business silos, across business units, across businesses, as well as across marketing, and the requirement for the integration of paid, owned and earned. And the requirement as well that communications also has utility reflected in technology through businesses. Of course, you need a fair degree of technical, digital, technological, IT-based knowledge in order to be an effective practitioner in marketing and communications these days. Again, it calls for specialists. You can hear people saying, well, we don't quite know how to do that, so we need to get someone in. So that isn't changing. Those two things at the front there, they're not changing at all. Yes, we have much more data available to us, but how we handle that data and how we make sense out of that data and actually turn it into insights is, of course, always the challenge. And here, you can argue that you actually need fewer cooks in the kitchen spoiling the broth, which is indeed often the way that roster rationalisation needs to go. But nevertheless, you can also see that having an increase in those data points and the knowledge that we have of our various cohorts and segments of consumer, you're going to need some fairly hefty technical knowledge in order to plough through that and actually dig down to the insights. And the fourth thing there is that we have a set of consumers who are as technically media channel savvy in many unlabelled ways as the marketers who address them, because we're all consumers. We all have our own channels, as well as we are all marketers, and we all have our own means of reaching our consumers. So you're dealing with a far more sophisticated consumer who wishes to encounter your brand or your company or your message in the way that he or she wants to. And that, of course, requires us to be a lot more agile, a lot more sophisticated, a lot more specialised, and a lot less broadcast in nature. So again, it's not a surprise to find that all of these things are driving the expansion of rosters. I mean, if we sum it up, it's about greater marketing complexity. And as I say, that's not going to stop. That's going to continue. It's going to get faster. We all know this. We all feel it. We either embrace it or stick our heads in the sand and hope it goes away. But it does, of course, require, one would think, at least in the prima facie case, more specialism, more deep knowledge of the channels and the opportunities and the technology and the data points and the consumer behaviour and the target markets and the cohorts and the segments that we're mining down to. More specialist knowledge in all of those facets of the marketing and communications operation. And more specialism requires more specialists is often the answer that people give, because it requires a lot more of anybody who purports to be any kind of marketing generalist, anybody who's going to be taking a broader view across a roster, across the marketing organisation, across business silos, across the marketing requirements. You've got to go broad by going deep, and you can't just go deep without being broad. This is the dilemma and the problem that digital disruption of our own markets brings us. So marketing generalists these days, they're an increasingly rare breed. It's almost like marketing aligners, really, alignment people, alignment specialists, if you want to really complicate things. These are the roles that we see succeeding, rather than the more traditional marketing generalist roles in a lot of structures of a lot of the clients that we work with. And it's no surprise that marketing director or those kinds of designations are being replaced in many markets. I mean, certainly in America and increasingly so in Europe, by consumer-based job titles like consumer director or market or consumer director. It's very interesting to watch that if you're actually the champion of consumer or customer at the top levels of an organisation, you can get you a lot further than a marketing designation can in this new environment. So there it is, a much more complex marketing environment, requiring, on the face of it at least, many more specialists, and putting far less importance on generalists, either on the advertising communications side, the agency side, or on the marketing side. So what have the marketer responses been that we've seen that are driving this roster? Well, this roster expansion. Well, the first thing is this kind of, my God, look, we've got a new channel, we've got a new way to our consumer here, we've got a new competitive threat, we've got a new way of doing things. Fix it fast. Get some people in. Get some guys in who can master this. We saw it a few years ago when social media first started to be kind of gripped by the larger end of town. And the number of social media specialists and agencies that popped up on all sorts of rosters that we were across is a good example here. Fix it fast. Get these people in to work alongside our existing agencies, and let's just make it happen quickly. The other thing is, as rosters kind of expand, people want stuff to be done cheaper. So as your larger agencies or your previous incumbent traditional agency would have had a financial and a commercial relationship with the client, as a smaller agency comes in to look at something on a much more kind of narrow focus and a specialist discipline, oh, guess what? You know, they can do it on a far lower cost base. Of course they can. And so the light is shone straight away on the large agencies to say, well, hang on a minute, do we need all of these strategy people, all of these account people, all of these production people, all of these overheads? Do we need all of that? Can you not do it cheaper, do it leaner, do it better? Now the answer is, well, it depends what you want to be done. But often the client's answer, the marketer's answer, is to say, well, put more into the secondary agencies, into the new guys. The other thing that really drives response here is whether you're dealing with a centralised marketing department or a decentralised marketing department. And although there's no hard and fast rules here, some of the examples I gave you earlier, one of them was centralised and one of them was decentralised. You can still get proliferation of agencies under a centralised structure. But typically what happens is that under a decentralised marketing structure, so one where either the business units are in charge of most of the 4 Ps of marketing, or the sales department is in charge of the marketing effort primarily, and marketing is used as communications, or whether it's split across silos, what you find is that proliferation of agencies, that expansion of the roster is incredibly rapid, because no one can say stop. And it becomes a very, very fast developing problem that quickly runs out of control. This is where you get ridiculous numbers like, 80, 90, 100 different agencies, all purportedly working for the same organisation. But it's not all a marketer's fault, of course, because agencies typically, you're protecting your own business here. So there's 2 main responses that we see again that start to drive this expansion. The first is the response that protects the revenue of an incumbent, so let's take the example of shopper marketing, which was a disruption that kind of went across a lot of retail brands about 3-4 years ago, and is still happening, where specialist shopper marketing agencies would go to FMCG clients and retail clients, FMCG clients, and say, look, actually, we can help you at the sharp end of your operations and your discussions and your negotiations with retailers by increasing footfall and increasing conversion. And given that the big retailers in this country have generally kind of gone for FMCG marketing budgets with a vengeance as part of the negotiation of price, that was absolutely exactly what a lot of those guys wanted to hear. And the response of a lot of the traditional agencies that we were across during that time was to say, shopper marketing, yeah, actually you need a specialist agency. We're going to hire someone who'll do that for you. Or in fact, we just hired a bloke that's come from the UK and he's very good at shopper marketing. He can do it. And the trouble is, no. The trouble is, half the time that can't happen, because one person within a traditional agency looking at a particular specialised discipline like that isn't going to cut it in the same way as an agency that's grown up on the shopper marketing side knows exactly how that discipline works and can produce a far better commercial result for that client. So it kind of drives that, in the end it kind of erodes the trust between marketer and traditional agency or incumbent agency. And that trust, as Darcy says, in my good opinion, once lost is lost forever. So far be it for me to quote Pride and Prejudice in a seminar, but there we are, I've just done that. It's very hard to regain that trust afterwards, and it's one of the main drivers of that loss of trust between previous incumbent, main incumbent, and proliferating roster marketing. It's a poisonous thing. The second thing that happens is that agencies will all try and eat each other's lunch as well. And of course, because without rules, that's exactly what people will do. We're all commercial people. So the response there is to try and expand revenue. So if you're a new entrant onto a roster, and you see an opportunity to go and steal some of the digital work, or go and steal some of the digital development work, or steal a piece of the PR or a piece of the social media, then you just have a go. Let us show you. Let us show you what we can do with that, Mr. or Mrs. Client. And immediately you've got 3, 4, 5, 6 different agencies working on a brand and a sub-brand, all fighting with each other, workflows from each to each, and on it goes. So you can see why we're in trouble, guys. So what happens once that roster is looking like this? Why is this an issue? Because some people say to us, look, we're sure that we know we've got a lot of agencies. Is this a problem? How many do we need? How many should we have? And have we got too many? What should we do? Is it not okay just to continue like this? So the answer, of course, is it depends what you're trying to do and what the objectives are. But in general, there are some common problems that come up, and we've labelled this rather dramatically here. Let me just take a quick drink. Labelled this rather dramatically the spiral of roster destruction. But it can be like this, and the trouble with this is a spiral of roster destruction because it can happen almost without marketers noticing, and often even without agencies necessarily noticing what's going on. And they've got a role to call it too. The first thing that happens is that the roster expands or changes population, but that happens nearly always without any pre-agreed, pre-thought-out roster model or strategy. And this is the trouble. Marketing teams, marketing departments, in our experience, in our observation, the first kind of expansion of the roster happens because, as I've said, someone needs to fix something, or there's a cost issue, or there's a response issue, or there's, this agency isn't quite getting what digital should feel like, or we always get TV ideas all the time. These first expansions of the roster happen without any roster model being laid down, and without any strategy for the roster growth or expansion being agreed and sorted out. And this leads to absolute chaos, as we'll see in a minute, because then immediately everybody is fighting with everybody. It also happens, and this is the biggest thing of all, this is almost like the elephant in the room when we get asked to kind of go and manage these problems. It also happens without any financial model. And so the agency that has given its all, thought itself, thought itself and its client into all sorts of commercial opportunities over many years, deep partnership in terms of building brands and building business opportunities with that client. All of a sudden, it finds that the client that it thought was its greatest client is actually looking over its shoulder at other people. And there's no guarantee, hardly ever is there any guarantee or any openness or any straightforward discussion with the incumbent agency that this is not a threat to the incumbent agency's revenue. So, of course, people are people. This becomes the big issue. And, these three things, the roster model, the actual strategy for what the marketing requirements are and how they should be fulfilled, and what the financial model should be that surrounds that. If you get these three things sorted out, then a lot of the expansion of the roster actually is of less injurious effect. It's not nearly such a bad thing. But very rare are the occasions where we come across clients who have either rung us about this or we've kind of gone into touch with them. Very rare are the times when we find that this has been done. One of the immediate effects is that if you let that go for very long, then no single agency has a significant share of that client's activity, or budget, or knowledge, or data, or I could actually add, or attention, or love, or trust. That trust, that attention, that love, that focus and all of the other things, the activity, budget, knowledge and data, they suddenly become diluted and fragmented. And that's really tough. It's really tough to get proper focus on your brand. I mean, God knows brands face enough disruption in their markets without disrupting their internal roster market and their internal teams in the way that they do, because there's no roster model, no strategy, no financial model around the expansion of that roster. So because that happens, because there is no one agency that actually has the trust and confidence of the client, then what happens, you can see it yourselves all the time. You suddenly start getting turf wars. You get clients that say, look, off you go, you three. Go, your media agency, digital agency, and creative agency. Why don't you just go off with this brief, sort it out, collaborate with each other, and come back and give us a solution. With no roles or rules or definitions between collaboration, cooperation, and coordination in that engagement from that client. Very typical. And of course, what happens, even though they may present some kind of creative, a united front when those three agencies come back, what's happened in the meantime is maybe there's collaboration, maybe there's proper collaboration, maybe there's just a quick phone call at the end to make it look like there was, or maybe there are three competing solutions that come back. And surprise, surprise, when those solutions come back, the recommendations are linked to the discipline that that agency is specialised in. So, any given brief, the media agency will come back with a media-led approach. The creative agency will come back with maybe an above-the-line or traditional broadcast media approach, and the digital agency may come back with a utility or an app or some kind of change to the way that the organisation does business, and so on and so forth. So there is no overall custodian there amongst your agency partners of the overall brand's future because of this insecurity, because of the turf wars. You can see how poisonous this is. And so often we got asked to go into an automotive manufacturer about when would that be, about the end of last year, about this time last year, and we're still with them now. Because they only had about $6-7 million, and they had about 8 to 10 agencies on their roster. But the trouble was, because there was no security of tenure, because there was no confidence in any of those agencies that their lunches weren't about to be eaten immediately by everybody else on the roster. And it's an automotive manufacturer, of course, an automotive brand, so their marketing team is lean, which is typically what happens in automotive. A lot of the marketing is outsourced in automotive. What was happening was that the marketing team, lean as they were running around like, with their proverbial pants on fire, trying to make the best, make something cohesive out of 8 different discipline-based recommendations for any given mark or model launch. Absolutely crazy, because there was no roster model, no strategy, and critically no financial model around what those agencies should do and how they should behave. And so you end up very quickly with a loss of strategy and focus on strategy, a loss of management focus. This is critical as well. This is very typical. So to go back again to that automotive manufacturer, that automotive brand I was just talking about, they spent most of the time doing their day jobs trying to get apples to mix effectively and convincingly with pears, not actually bringing the brand forward or moving sales or securing initiatives or all of the great things that brand was capable of doing, but actually just trying to force together bits of jigsaws, 8 different parts of a jigsaw that didn't fit, that were given to them by 8 different agencies and 8 different discipline specialisms. So you can see what an enormous opportunity cost this quickly becomes. So managing all of that, and again, the automotive manufacturer here was a good example. They were suddenly needing to find more marketing head hours in order to do their jobs. They were working ridiculous hours and after different headcounts and additional headcount. And there was a real loss of cost control across that agency roster that existed at that time. So when we went then to look at the actual value that was being received for the inputs that were being given, and the outputs rather being given to the client at that point, there was a real loss of value because the client team just didn't have the time to be on the ball. Very, very difficult situation, and a lot of bad blood in that as well after a while, because the clients kind of knew that they were being, or felt that they were being charged more than they should be charged, but couldn't ever prove it, didn't have it at the time. Sometimes it was true, sometimes they were actually getting conspicuous value, as is always the case. increased marketing headouts, just go back to that. This is the hidden one. Often, especially in a decentralized organization, the marketing silos there, the heads of the marketing for each of the business units, for instance, will say, well, you know what, we're not going to centralize here, we're not going to centralize this roster and save money because we get a really great deal from this agency which is owned by my mate that is 3 or 4 people that does lots of design, a bit of media buying and a bit of SEM for us. And they just live down the road and they give us an amazing deal. But the trouble is what's never ever captured in ascribing that amazing deal to this agency is the increased marketing head hours in briefing that agency, managing that agency, shaping the recommendations of that agency to fit the brand, to fit the strategy, to fit the other recommendations within the roster, and then to turn that into something cohesive at the end of it. It also doesn't ever take advantage or take account of the overheads that are being paid to that agency as well, and it hardly ever takes account of the opportunity costs, where actually you could amalgamate what can often be quite a small spend, sometimes it can be a very large spend, put it in the right roster structure, and then leverage the economies of scale that immediately come out of that. And so typically what happens once this problem isn't solved or this expansion is embarked upon without those 3 key tools in your tool bag there, the roster model, the strategy and the financial model, is that the marketing team comes under significant results pressure and significant cost pressure. And typically what they do is they expand the roster to other smaller specialist providers in order to solve the problem that they never solved in the first place. And so it goes on. So far so depressing, huh? Let's have a look at what can be done. What the hell do we do? Well, it's actually disarmingly simple. I mean, I would say that because it's kind of what we spend all of our time, I'd say about 60%, 70% of our time doing at the moment. Back to the focus. So what are we going to do about it? Right, let's get practical here. So as I say, this is something that we do, this is our day job, so it may seem simple to us and quick to us because we do it all the time. If you've got any questions, then do store them up and get ready to poke those out there. The first and most critical thing to do, before you go pitching, before you go putting red lines through agencies, before you get brutal about this, it's a very quick but logical and penetrating exercise, which is to define and articulate what exactly the current marketing requirements are of the organisation and what the future ones are. And even if they're not sure, if the marketing organisation is not sure what the future ones are, what they're likely to be. Now we help clients do this. It's a really instructive exercise. As I say, it doesn't have to take long, and it's a fairly brutal thing to do. But what it allows is for a really tight focus on what actually the important priorities are. And 9 times out of 10, we find that a lot of what is being done in the name of any given marketing organisation, particularly when it's decentralised, particularly when the outputs of that marketing organisation are divorced from any ROI measurement or any results focus, and typically in a decentralised organisation and in many centralised ones, it's very hard to trace that link from the actual effect of the activity back to the input into the strategy of the next time that activity comes up. Anyway, what was I saying? So it's 9 times out of 10, it actually rationalises and sharpens exactly what is important, and therefore by definition what is not important in what the marketing requirements are. A lot of organisations spend a lot of their time doing a lot of things that are small and don't really matter as much as the big things. And those small things, as any agency will know, particularly in a fragmented roster, can take up nearly as much time as the big things. Who was it who said the biggest thing in business is making sure the biggest things stay the biggest things? It might have been my uncle. So that's the first stage. Just get very, very clear about what those marketing requirements are. Now, sometimes with marketing organisations, what we are then tasked with doing, because it's as much internal structure for marketers as it is roster structure, frankly, because you need to get tight and you need to get focused on why it is you got here, so you don't go and just go off on a journey and come back to the same place again. So very often there's an additional segment in here Someone's asked if we can get this presentation through email. Of course you can. So thank you for asking that. So there's a great section here which is around looking at the actual marketing structure behind the roster, looking at the actual marketing structure of the organisation itself. And there, this is a subject for another webinar, I've no doubt. But there you've got some choices, and they're pretty clear choices, and they depend on what that business is about, and what kind of culture that business has, whether it's a sales culture, a product culture, an innovation culture, a financial culture, a marketing culture. And that's okay, and sometimes there's a mix there. But you've got the opportunity to build your marketing structure and processes around either your channel, either your segment, or your product or your business units. And there's various levels of courage involved in making any of those changes, and sometimes you can set those changes as a destination and so on and so forth. Again, subject for another webinar, but a very important part. So once you've actually got your marketing requirements, you then look at your marketing structure and your marketing process and go, is that fit for purpose? Is that fit for the changes that are happening in the market that we've already identified? Is this actually, have the marketing job descriptions and roles kept pace with channel changes, technology changes, customer changes, specialism, proliferation, all of the things that we've touched on already? And in most cases, of course, guess what? They haven't, and they require some adjustment. So there's certainly lots of value to be identified there in terms of just making sure that your marketing structure is fit for delivering the requirements. But it's possible in this process to kind of do these two things quite quickly. We tend to move quite fast because once these opportunities open up for change, you need to kind of move fast so that people don't realise that you're changing things. As soon as people realise you're trying to change things, often it can be kind of mired in, it can be kicked into the long grass and mired in reaction and procrastination. So we tend to kind of get in and get out as fast as we can and help you guys out. But after that, so once you've got the marketing requirements and you've looked at what this structure could be or should be, or what that needs to be, say in a typical 1 to 3 year horizon, what kind of structure are we aiming for in the marketing side? You then develop the roster model with those two things in mind. Because a roster model is far easier to change, and far easier to change quickly, than a marketing structure and marketing processes and marketing culture. So the trick here, the smart trick, and we've just been involved with doing this with a big financial services client, the smart trick is to use the roster structure, the roster model, to drive structural and process change within the marketing organisation. Focus on the marketing requirements. So the third box there actually drives the second box, which is based on the first box. Goodness me, this could be another webinar here. But anyway, that's right, we'll keep going. So that's the trick. You're developing a roster model that reflects that structure, or how that structure needs to be, in order more effectively and more efficiently to deliver those marketing requirements. That means matching skill sets of agencies to marketing requirements, and doing it brutally and doing it cleanly and logically, and we'll come on to that in a second. And the second thing to do here, this is just basic politeness, just basic good business. Develop a proper, robust, fair, transparent remuneration model for those agencies that are going to be working under that roster model. Don't play guess the budget. And it doesn't need to be a retained relationship. It doesn't need to be a project-based relationship. Typically these days, hybrid is the way that we find things are going and works best for both agencies and clients when you've got a lean way of working. But that's essential. You've got to get the remuneration right. It's got to be benchmarked and fair, and it's got to be transparent. It's got to be predictable, so the agencies can see what's coming up, and the clients know that they're getting value for the price that they're paying. So those two things. And then, as I was saying earlier, then becomes, once you've got the roster model, then you need to populate it. And so what you're doing then, you're populating the agency slot. So say there is in any given, say in an example marketing portfolio for an organisation, one that we're working on at the moment. So at the moment they've got around 10 to 12 digital agencies and around 20 creative agencies, for example. and there's some interplay and interchange between those. There's about 8 brands. And we've looked at their spend and the level and nature of activity in both of those particular channels. So on the creative side, there's a lot of strategy and then a lot of kind of concept development. And on the digital side, there's a lot of concept production, and there's also some build and then some business driving as well, and some utility building as well. So it's kind of, it's kind of a yin and yang thing there. But 20 agencies on the creative side and about 8 on the digital side. We've looked at the level of their activity, the nature of their activity, the spend. We've benchmarked against what we see elsewhere for category, and we've actually said to them that you probably need to be getting down to about 6 or 7 tops creative agencies on a reduced scope, so paying them for what they're good at and not for just being jacks of all trades necessarily. And we're recommending at the moment they run with around 2 digital agencies. Interesting point there was that on the digital side, their roster was structured around what would have been a reasonable stab at fulfilling their requirements about 18 months ago, 2 years ago. The digital agency market has changed fundamentally in that time and will continue to change. And a lot of the discipline silos that we used to see in digital, where people would come from a creative side or a technical side or a build side or a search side of the discipline, those things are now increasingly being handled by single agencies and done very, very effectively indeed. And often you find that media as well bleeds into that too, and you find that a lot of the media agencies are able to handle data search and some of quite a bit of the digital content as well. So on we go again, probably the subject for another webinar. But this is the task at this stage, and also to make sure that where there is no case for breaking up the agency contribution to that business by silo or by brand or by product unit, where in fact there is a case for having enterprise-wide agency responsibility, then you build that back in. It's very hard to justify, or very ridiculous to justify, a different sponsorship agency for, say, a client with 6 to 8 brands than it is to say, look, let's have one sponsorship agency across the whole organization that does the proper deals with the proper leverage, gets a portfolio view, an enterprise-wide view across sponsorship for the entire organization. Helps out with sales, helps out with the sales department as well, and makes sure that the entire company is getting the leverage and the economy of spend that it needs. Similarly with digital, similarly with media and with channel planning, similarly with search. So much fewer and further between these days are the agency disciplines that really genuinely do require an individual brand level or product level or business unit level focus. Arguably they are perhaps just at strategy and maybe initial creative idea, and sometimes not that. And then once you've got that roster model, you then go and negotiate it and implement it. And so you go and see which agencies are actually up for taking on those responsibilities. Who wants to expand? Who's not up for that? Where are the skill sets in the agency roster that's there? Is there a requirement to go to market or is there not? Sometimes there is. Certainly for our clients where they've got 90 or 70 or 40 different agencies, it just seems a bit perverse to say, well, of the 40 that we've got, none of them's any good and we've got to go and pitch everything. It's just crazy. It won't be true. You'll be asking the wrong agencies the right questions or the right agencies the wrong questions. That's what will happen. So you need to become a better marketer before you work out whether you actually deserve what you see as better agencies. We often find this is the case. Rare are the occasions where we say to clients, great, let's run a pitch for digital and a pitch in sponsorship and a pitch in shopper marketing and a pitch in strategy. It's just a waste of time. It's much better to get the marketing structure, the marketing requirements and the roster model right, and then look to your existing roster and work out who is best placed to take that on. Remember, there's a lot of change involved here. So if you've got people who are already familiar with your business, then you're not going to take a bath while you're making that change, or at least the bath won't be quite as big. And then critically, you maintain, monitor, and govern that. So you make sure that that collaboration, cooperation, and coordination are measured with any kind of any of the other tools. So we've got one called Evaluating. There are others in the market like Appraise and Navigari. Plenty of others that help out there. But it's important to make sure that everyone in that roster then is playing nicely and is alive to the business requirements of the marketing or the organisation, as opposed to the business requirements of their individual agency or agency group. So goodness me, there's that ladder, and I've taken a while to get up to the top of that ladder. It doesn't take that long. We can probably get from the bottom to the top here around 6 weeks with a bit of cooperation. Sometimes faster. Sometimes we find marketing organisations can't go as fast as that, and that's okay. But you can make a big difference in a short time, as long as you've got the appetite to do that. And what do you do if you're an agency caught in a roster like this? We think there's 4 things. If you're an agency that finds yourself in an expanding roster without any rules or any roles or responsibilities, or you find your share of that going, 4 things you can do, 4 golden rules if you like. The first is to play nicely and don't engage in the turf wars, however insecure you might feel. However much you feel like other people are having a go or taking your lunch or taking your roles, it's much better, if you can possibly avoid it, not to turn into Ari Gold here. It's much better to play nicely, to collaborate, to do the right thing by the brand and the business, and not to keep defending your turf. That's hard. It's hard, easy to say, hard to do. I know, and I speak as someone who, in my agency days, was involved on a very big piece of business in Sydney and Melbourne, in a 4-way agency tussle for pretty much the whole thing. And yeah, it was bloody and horrible and awful at times. And we ended up with the whole thing, bizarrely. But we did it by playing nicely, and we did it by not engaging in turf wars. But if I'm honest, there was a fair bit of luck, as well as a degree of judgment there. But it's a small town. Australia is a small marketing town, and there's plenty of people who'll meet you again coming around the traps. It's best that you do the things that are right and do as you would be done by here. But the other thing is, be brilliant at what you are brilliant at, and make sure that you maintain the rage and maintain the effort, even in the face of people undercutting you, or standing in front of you and taking the limelight and all of those things. Be brilliant at what you do brilliantly. And I'll add to that, don't try and pretend that you can do things that you can't do. So don't say, we can get a social media guy in. We'll get him in tomorrow. He'd be great. Yeah, he's worked in the States. We'll get him in, and I'm sure he can sort out your social media for you. Well, it ain't going to work. Right? So it's much better to play nicely with the others who are doing that, form that alliance, become that inter-agency team, and become indispensable that way. But allow for other people's expertise. And here's the biggest one: ask your client for clear guidance. It's just not good enough when clients say, "You guys go off and play, work it all out and come back to me." It's just not good enough. So if your clients are doing that, you need to ask them for clear guidance, what the roles are, what the responsibilities are, and what their expectations are for whether you are about to collaborate, cooperate, or coordinate with the other roster agencies. So, I've talked to you then about what is driving this expansion of rosters and the complexity of rosters that we see everywhere now, why clients are ringing us up. I've talked about how that is just so destructive for marketing in Australia and for agency life in Australia. We've talked about, pretty briefly, although maybe you don't think it was brief, it was brief for us. We talked about how you get out of this, what you do, what practically you do in order to remedy this stuff, and then how you might act if you're an agency person listening to this webinar in order to survive this. So, hopefully, you've now got at least a better idea of the dimensions of this problem, why it's a problem, and what can be done, and how we need, as participants here, to act as marketers and as agencies in order to get a better result. And the result here is better business for everybody. It's not about cost cutting. It really isn't. It's about marketers getting better value from fewer agencies who have got more of their business and are more committed to moving things on and up. And it's making sure that enterprise-wide expertise is used wherever enterprise-wide expertise is appropriate. It's not about throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It is about getting very smart and open and straight and logical and robust about how we all engage each other as business partners, and how we engage our marketing colleagues within a marketing organisation in order to further the commercial fortunes of the business in which we work. So on October 21st, we're talking about one of the other hot topics here, which is aligning digital marketing to marketing. Then on November the 11th, we're looking at what the challenges are for marketers in a carbon-constrained future, which I think is a really interesting and important thing for us to chat about here. It's something that generally gets scoffed at a little bit when you raise it as an important business issue, but God, it is, and it will be a hugely important one in the future. And then supercharge your agency with incentive-based remuneration, which is not nearly as painful, agency people, as it sounds. It's actually the way to success and riches, but only if you're good. Then I might say, good on you all. Thank you very much for attending. Absolute pleasure to do these things. And if you ever find yourselves in these kind of roster difficulties, marketers, clients, agency guys, then hey, give us a call and we'll come down to the Batmobile and see if there's any way we can help you. All right. Thanks so much, guys. Cheers now.